The whiskey-soaked laughter echoed through the trading post as 5 rough men slammed their fists on the bar, their voices rising over the howling November wind that rattled the wooden shutters. "I'm telling you, she won't last a month up there," declared Thomas Garrett, a grizzled trapper with tobacco-stained teeth, jabbing his finger toward the pale, trembling woman huddled in the corner. "That fragile little thing won't survive the winter in these mountains, not with a storm already brewing." Eleanor Whitmore sat wrapped in a threadbare shawl, her auburn hair disheveled and her green eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been traveling west with her father and younger brother, seeking a fresh start in Oregon after losing their farm in Missouri. So then, cholera had swept through their wagon train somewhere in the Wyoming territory, claiming her father first, then her brother 2 days later. The other families, terrified of contagion, had abandoned her at this isolated trading post near the base of the Wind River Mountains, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather satchel containing her mother's Bible and a few personal items. The year was 1877, and winter came early and merciless in these mountains. Eleanor had nowhere to go, no family left, and no means of survival. The trading post owner, a harsh man named Vernon Pike, had made it clear she could not stay past the week unless she could pay, and she had no money. Her situation was desperate, and these crude men seemed to find entertainment in discussing her inevitable demise as though she were not even present. $20 says she freezes before Christmas, another man chimed in, slamming coins on the bar. "I'll take that bet," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward the entrance, where a massive figure filled the frame, snow dusting his broad shoulders and the thick bearskin coat that made him appear even larger than he already was. The man who stepped inside stood well over 6 feet tall, with powerful shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt beneath the open coat. His chest was barrel-wide, his arms thick with muscle, earned from years of hauling traps, chopping wood, and surviving in conditions that would kill softer men. Dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, partially tied back with a leather cord, and a full beard covered his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, a piercing gray-blue that seemed to see straight through a person, assessing and calculating with an intelligence that contradicted the rough exterior. Elijah Stone was known throughout the territory as a man who preferred solitude to society, mountains to towns, and silence to the empty chatter of so-called civilization. He came down from his cabin high in the mountains only a few times each year to trade furs and purchase necessary supplies. Most folks gave him a wide berth, uncertain whether to respect or fear the mountain man who could disappear into the wilderness for months at a time and emerge looking stronger than when he left. "You taking the bet, you Stone?" Thomas Garrett sneered, though his voice held less confidence than before. "That little thing won't make it a week, let alone through winter. What are you planning to do? Keep her alive through sheer stubbornness?" Elijah's gaze moved from the men at the bar to Eleanor in the corner. She met his eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of her desperation perhaps, or recognition of a fellow soul who had known loss. She did not look away or shrink from his scrutiny, and he respected that. There was steel beneath her fragility, a will to survive that these fools were too drunk and stupid to recognize. "I will take her to my cabin," Elijah stated, his voice carrying the finality of stone settling. "She will survive the winter. Come spring, when the pass is clear, you will pay me your money and admit you were wrong about her." Vernon Pike leaned across his bar, eyes gleaming with malicious interest. "Now hold on there, Stone. You are saying you will take responsibility for keeping this woman alive through the whole winter? That is 4, maybe 5 months, depending on when the thaw comes. You are willing to bet on that?" "I do not make wagers I cannot win," Elijah replied, his gaze never leaving Eleanor. "Do we have an agreement?" The men exchanged glances, some grinning at what they perceived as foolishness, others calculating the odds. Finally, Thomas Garrett stepped forward. "All right, Stone. We will put in $100 total among the 5 of us. You keep her alive until the first wagon can make it through the pass come spring, and the money is yours. But if she dies, you owe us nothing. And we get to say we were right, And you have to bring her back here yourself so we can see she is alive and well, not just surviving, but actually healthy. Deal?" Elijah crossed the room in 3 long strides, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and extended his hand. The handshake was brief and firm, sealing an agreement that would change 2 lives forever. Then he turned to Eleanor, and his voice softened just slightly. "Gather your things, miss. We leave within the hour. The storm that is coming will make the trail impassable if we wait longer." Eleanor stood on trembling legs, clutching her satchel to her chest. "I have nothing else," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from disuse and unshed tears. "This is all that remains." Something flickered in Elijah's eyes, an emotion quickly suppressed. He nodded once. Bede then strode to the trading post shelves and began pulling down items: blankets, a heavy wool coat, sturdy boots, dried meat, flour, coffee, salt, and various other supplies. Vernon Pike protested the selections until Elijah dropped a leather pouch heavy with coins on the counter, more than enough to cover everything and then some. "The woman needs proper clothing and supplies," Elijah said flatly, "unless you want her dead before we even reach my cabin, in which case the bet is void and you get nothing." Vernon grumbled, but accepted the logic and the money. Elijah returned to Eleanor and held out the wool coat. "Put this on, the boots too. We have a hard climb ahead, and I will not carry you if you falter." His words were harsh, but his actions told a different story. As Eleanor struggled with the unfamiliar boots, he knelt without comment and helped her lace them properly, his large hands surprisingly gentle. When she stood, drowning in the oversized coat, he adjusted the collar and pulled the hood up to protect her face from the wind. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "I used to ride my father's mare back home, though it has been some time." "Good enough. You will ride behind me. Hold tight and do not let go, no matter what happens. Understood?" Eleanor nodded, and for the first time since her family had died, she felt a small flicker of something that might have been hope. This stranger had just wagered on her survival, had spent his own money to outfit her properly, and was offering her the only chance she had to live through the winter. She did not know why he would do such a thing, but she was grateful beyond words. They stepped out into the bitter cold, where 2 horses waited, both sturdy mountain-bred animals built for harsh conditions. Elijah's primary mount was a massive gray gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. He loaded the supplies onto a pack saddle on the second horse, then swung himself up onto the gray with an ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He extended his hand down to Eleanor, and she grasped it, surprised by the strength in his grip as he hauled her up behind him as though she weighed nothing at all. "Wrap your arms around my waist and hold on," he instructed. "Press close. Your body heat and mine together will keep you warmer." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before obeying, her arms encircling his broad torso, her hands barely meeting on the other side. She could feel the solid muscle beneath the layers of clothing, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and the overwhelming sense of strength and capability that radiated from him. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Elijah urged the horses forward, and they began the ascent into the mountains. The wind picked up almost immediately, driving snow into their faces and making visibility difficult. The trail was narrow and treacherous, winding between towering pines and along cliff edges that made Eleanor's stomach clench with fear. But Elijah navigated with the confidence of a man who had traveled this path 1,000 times, and the horse beneath them never faltered. Hours passed in cold silence, broken only by the howl of the wind and the steady crunch of hooves on snow-covered ground. Eleanor's fingers grew numb despite the gloves Elijah had provided, and her face felt frozen beneath the wool scarf wrapped around her lower face. She pressed closer to Elijah's back, drawing what warmth she could from his body, and marveled at his apparent imperviousness to the cold that was slowly seeping into her bones. As darkness began to fall, Elijah finally spoke. "We are nearly there. Another mile and we reach my cabin. You have done well, not complaining or slowing us down." "Thank you," Eleanor managed through chattering teeth, "for taking me with you, for the bet. I know you do not know me, and I cannot understand why you would risk your money or your supplies on a stranger, but I am grateful." "You needed help," Elijah replied simply, as though that explained everything. "I had the means to provide it." The money from the bet will be useful come spring, but that is not why I made the wager. Those men are fools who find entertainment in the suffering of others. You deserved better than to be the subject of their mockery." His words warmed her more than any fire could have. This rough mountain man, who looked like he could tear a bear apart with his bare hands, possessed a sense of honor and decency that the so-called civilized men in the trading post had lacked entirely. The cabin emerged from the swirling snow like a sanctuary, solid and well-built, tucked against a rocky hillside with towering pines providing additional shelter from the wind. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, constructed of thick logs chinked tight against the weather, with a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A small barn stood nearby. Eleanor and Elijah guided the horses toward it first. Inside the barn, 3 other horses nickered a greeting, and Eleanor saw that the structure was well maintained and stocked with hay and feed. Elijah dismounted and then helped her down, steadying her when her stiff legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Get the blood flowing again," he advised. "Walk around a bit while I tend the horses, then we will go inside and get a fire started." Eleanor did as instructed, stamping her feet and swinging her arms while Elijah removed saddles and gear with efficient movements. He rubbed down both horses thoroughly, checked their hooves, and made sure they had adequate food and water before hauling the supply packs over his shoulder as though they weighed nothing. "Come," he said, and Eleanor followed him through the deepening snow to the cabin door. But the interior was dark and cold, but Elijah moved through it with the ease of familiarity. Eleanor heard the strike of flint, saw sparks, and then a small flame caught in the oil lamp he had lit. Golden light spread through the single large room, revealing a space that was surprisingly clean and well organized. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a thick bearskin rug spread before it. A sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined the walls holding supplies, tools, and provisions. A large bed frame stood in one corner, piled with furs and blankets, and Eleanor felt her cheeks flush at the sight of it, suddenly aware that she would be spending the winter alone in this cabin with a man she had just met. Elijah seemed to sense her discomfort. "Gee, you will have the bed," he stated matter-of-factly as he began building a fire in the fireplace. "I will sleep near the fire on the floor. There is a privacy screen I will set up so you can change clothing and have some space to yourself." Relief flooded through Eleanor. "That is very kind of you. I did not know what to expect." "I'm not the kind of man who would take advantage of a woman in a desperate situation," Elijah said, his voice carrying a note of steel. "You are safe here, Eleanor. I give you my word on that." It was the first time he had spoken her name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you, Elijah," she replied softly. "Your word means a great deal to me." The fire caught and began to spread warmth through the cabin, and Elijah set about preparing a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, baked in a Dutch oven set among the coals. Eleanor offered to help, but he waved her toward a chair near the fire. "Warm yourself first. You are still shaking from the cold. There will be plenty of work for you in the days to come, but tonight you rest and recover." As the cabin warmed and the smell of cooking food filled the air, Eleanor felt the tension that had gripped her for weeks begin to ease. She watched Elijah move about the cabin, noting the careful way he measured ingredients, the practiced efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence in everything he did. He was nothing like any man she had ever known. The men in her town back in Missouri had been farmers and shopkeepers, men who gathered in groups and spoke loudly about their accomplishments. Elijah possessed a quiet confidence that needed no boasting, a strength that was simply evident in his every action. When the food was ready, he served her a generous portion and took a smaller one for himself. Eleanor had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite touched her lips, and then she ate with an appetite that would have embarrassed her under other circumstances. Elijah noticed but said nothing, merely slid half of his own portion onto her plate when she finished. "You need to rebuild your strength," he said when she protested. "I have plenty, and you have been without proper food for too long." They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Elijah heated water for washing. He set up a folding screen made of oiled canvas near the bed, giving Eleanor privacy to change into a simple nightgown he provided. clearly one of his own shirts, which hung to her ankles and billowed around her thin frame. When she emerged, wrapped in one of the blankets, Elijah had already laid out a thick pallet of furs near the fire and was pulling off his boots. Eleanor climbed into the bed, sinking into the softness of the furs and blankets, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt warm and safe. The bed smelled of pine and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and clean that she associated with Elijah. She watched through half-closed eyes as he banked the fire and stretched out on his pallet, his large frame taking up considerable space even on the floor. "Elijah," she whispered into the darkness, "why did you really take the bet? Why did you bring me here?" There was a long pause, and Eleanor thought perhaps he had fallen asleep or would not answer. Then his deep voice rumbled through the cabin. "I lost someone once. My wife and infant son 7 years ago. Fever took them both within 3 days. I was out checking trap lines and came home to find them dead and already cold. I should have been there. I should have been able to help them, protect them, save them somehow." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, tears stinging her eyes at the pain she heard in his voice. "I am so sorry," she said softly. "I came to the mountains after that," Elijah continued, "could not stand to be around people, around life continuing as though nothing had happened. But today when I saw you sitting there in that corner, saw those men treating your life as though it were nothing more than a betting chip for their entertainment, I knew I could not walk away. Maybe I cannot bring back my Mary and little Josiah, but I can keep you alive. I can give you a chance to have a future. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Eleanor whispered. "You are giving me my life back, Elijah. I will never be able to repay that debt." "There is no debt," Elijah replied firmly. "You owe me nothing, Eleanor. We will get through this winter together, and come spring, you can decide what you want to do with your life. Until then, you are under my protection, and no harm will come to you. That is a promise." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a hope she had thought lost forever. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and the steady breathing of the mountain man who had saved her life. The days that followed established a rhythm to their existence. Elijah rose before dawn each morning to tend the animals, check his trap lines in the nearby woods, and haul in firewood for the insatiable appetite of the fireplace that kept the cabin warm against the brutal cold outside. Eleanor proved herself far from useless, taking over the cooking and mending, organizing the supplies, and insisting on doing her share of the work despite Elijah's initial resistance. "I will not be a burden," she told him firmly on the third morning when he tried to refuse her help with hauling water from the nearby spring. "You saved my life and gave me shelter, but I have my pride. Let me contribute, Elijah. Let me earn my place here." He had looked at her for a long moment, those gray-blue eyes assessing, and then nodded. "All right. But you will tell me if any task is too much. The cold here can be dangerous if you overexert yourself and then cannot get warm again." Eleanor agreed, and from that point forward, they worked as a team. She learned to read the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of the animals. She learned which herbs and roots Elijah had stored could be used for cooking and which for medicine. She learned to mend leather and fur, to render fat for candles and soap, to bake bread in the Dutch oven that produced loaves far better than anything she had made back home. Elijah, in turn, revealed himself to be far more than just a rough mountain man. But he had been educated back east before heading west, and he owned several books that had survived his years in the wilderness. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away and the cabin secure against the night, they would sit near the fire, and Eleanor would read aloud from Shakespeare or the Bible or a collection of poems while Elijah worked on repairing traps or carving. His hands, so large and capable, could create delicate details in wood, fashioning beautiful utensils and decorative pieces that spoke of an artistic soul beneath the rugged exterior. They talked during those evening hours, sharing stories of their pasts. Eleanor spoke of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother, who had died when Eleanor was 15, of her father's grief and determination to start fresh out west. She spoke of her brother, just 14 years old, and how she had held him as he died, unable to do anything to ease his suffering. Elijah shared his own history, of growing up in Pennsylvania as the son of a blacksmith, of falling in love with Mary when they were both barely 18, of their dreams of building a life together. He spoke of his son, born healthy and strong, and the joy that had filled him for the brief 3 months the boy had lived. He spoke of his guilt and grief, of the years spent trying to outrun his pain in the wilderness. "But the mountains do not let you hide from yourself," Elijah said one evening as snow pattered against the cabin walls. "They strip away all the pretense and force you to face who you really are." I learned that I could survive alone, that I was strong enough to endure anything nature threw at me. But I also learned that surviving is not the same as living. I have been surviving for 7 years, Eleanor. I am only now starting to remember what it feels like to actually live. Eleanor looked up from her mending, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "What changed?" she asked softly. Elijah met her gaze, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You did," he said simply. "Having another person here, someone to talk to share meals with, to hear moving around the cabin, it reminds me that I am still human, that I still have something to offer besides just existing in isolation." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had not experienced since before her father's death. She was not naive enough to call it love, not yet, but she recognized it as the seed from which love might grow. Elijah Stone was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong and capable, yes, but also kind and gentle in ways that surprised her daily. He respected her, listened to her opinions, and treated her as an equal partner in their shared survival, rather than as a burden or possession. As the weeks passed and winter deepened its grip on the mountains, Eleanor found herself watching Elijah with increasing interest. She noticed the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt when he chopped wood, the play of muscles in his arms and back. She noticed the way he would push his long hair back from his face when he was concentrating, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was happening more and more often. She noticed the gentleness in his large hands when he helped her over rough terrain on the rare occasions they went outside together, the protective way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger, the soft tone his voice took when he spoke to her, and she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, a hunger in his gaze that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with loneliness and longing. The realization that she was falling in love with Elijah Stone hit Eleanor one morning in late December as she watched him trudge through waist-deep snow toward the cabin, carrying a deer he had killed over his shoulders as though it weighed nothing. Snow clung to his beard and hair, his breath created clouds in the frigid air, and his face was red from the cold. But his eyes lit up when he saw her watching from the window, and he grinned at her with unabashed pleasure. Her heart had stuttered in her chest, and she had pressed her hand to her bodice, feeling the rapid beating beneath her palm. She loved him. She loved this strong, kind, wounded man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. She loved his quiet competence, his dry humor, his intelligence and creativity, his respect and gentleness. She loved the safety she felt in his presence, the way he made her feel valued and appreciated and seen. But did he feel the same way? Or was she merely a responsibility to him, a promise made to be kept, a woman who reminded him of what he had lost? Eleanor did not know, and she was afraid to ask, afraid to risk the comfortable companionship they had built. So she kept her feelings to herself and tried to ignore the way her heart raced when his hand brushed hers as he passed her a dish, or the way heat flooded her body when she caught him staring at her across the cabin. Christmas came and went with a quiet celebration. Eleanor had managed to make a small cake from their supplies, and Elijah surprised her with a beautifully carved wooden box he had been working on in secret, complete with delicate flowers carved into the lid. "For your mother's Bible and your personal items," he explained, looking almost shy as he presented it to her. "I thought you might like something special to keep them safe." Eleanor had burst into tears, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift, and before she could stop herself, she had thrown her arms around Elijah's neck and hugged him tightly. But he had frozen for just a moment, then his arms came around her, careful and gentle, holding her as she cried. She felt so small in his embrace, protected and cherished, and when she finally pulled back, she saw something blazing in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she whispered, her hands still resting on his shoulders, able to feel the tension in his powerful frame. I made that bet to save your life, and I do not regret that for a moment. But somewhere along the way, keeping you alive stopped being about winning money or proving those fools wrong. It became about keeping you here, with me, because I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before. You have brought light back into my life, Eleanor. You have made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond mere survival. I look forward to waking up each morning because I know I will see your face. I look forward to evenings by the fire because I get to hear your voice. I think about you constantly when I'm out checking traps, wondering if you are warm enough, if you are happy, if you might possibly feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "And what do you feel for me, Elijah?" she asked, barely able to breathe. "I love you," he said, the words simple and direct and utterly sincere. "I love you, Eleanor Whitmore, and I know I have no right to say that after such a short time, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you. And if you will have me, I want you to stay here not just through winter, but forever. I want to marry you and build a life with you and make you happy every single day for as long as I live." Joy exploded through Eleanor's entire being, so intense it was almost painful. "Oh, Elijah," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, watching you and learning who you truly are beneath the rough exterior. You are the best man I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay with you forever. Yes, to all of it, yes." Elijah's face transformed, years seeming to fall away as pure happiness replaced the hard lines etched by pain and loss. He cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though he was afraid she might break. But when Eleanor pressed closer, her hands sliding into his hair, the kiss deepened, becoming a declaration of love and need and promise all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elijah rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly," he said. "When spring comes and we can get to a town with a preacher, we will marry officially. But in my heart, you are already my wife, Eleanor. You are already mine, and I am already yours." "In my heart, we are already married," Eleanor agreed. "The words spoken by a preacher will only make it official to the world. What we have is already real and binding." That night, Elijah moved the privacy screen, and Eleanor moved from the bed to his arms on the pallet near the fire. They held each other through the night, warm and safe and loved, talking in whispers about their future, making plans and dreaming dreams that seemed actually possible now. They decided to stay in the cabin rather than moving to a town when spring came. Elijah had built a good life here, and Eleanor had come to love the mountains and the solitude, the peace and beauty that surrounded them. They would make the trip down to the trading post when necessary for supplies and to maintain some connection with the outside world. But this cabin would be their home. As January gave way to February, the brutal cold persisted, but Eleanor barely noticed. She was wrapped in the warmth of Elijah's love, secure in the knowledge that she had found her place in the world. They spent the long winter evenings making plans for spring. Elijah would expand the cabin, adding a second room that could serve as a bedroom, giving them more space. Eleanor wanted to plant a vegetable garden and maybe get some chickens. They talked about children, both admitting they wanted a family. And the joy in Elijah's eyes when he spoke of becoming a father again made Eleanor's heart ache with love for him. Their days fell into an even easier rhythm now that their feelings were declared. Eleanor would wake wrapped in Elijah's arms, his body heat keeping her warm even when the fire had burned low in the night. They would rise together and tend to the morning chores, working side by side with the easy cooperation of two people perfectly in tune. Elijah taught Eleanor to shoot, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself if something ever happened to him, though Eleanor refused to contemplate such a possibility. She proved to be a decent shot after some practice, and Elijah's pride in her accomplishment was evident. One afternoon in late February, Elijah returned from checking his trap lines with a troubled expression. Eleanor immediately noticed, setting aside the shirt she was mending. "What is wrong?" she asked. "I found tracks near the eastern boundary of my territory," Elijah said, shrugging out of his heavy coat and hanging it near the fire to dry. "Human tracks and recent. Someone has been watching the cabin." Fear shot through Eleanor. "Who would be out here in the middle of winter?" "That is what concerns me," Elijah replied grimly. "Could be someone lost and looking for shelter. But if that were the case, they would have approached the cabin directly. These tracks circled around, staying hidden in the tree line like someone was scouting. I do not like it." "What should we do?" Eleanor asked, moving closer to him instinctively. Elijah pulled her into his arms, his embrace reassuring and strong. "We stay alert. I will keep my rifle close, and you will keep yours within reach at all times. It might be nothing, but I will not take chances with your safety." 2 days later, they had their answer. Eleanor was preparing supper while Elijah was in the barn tending the horses when she heard voices outside. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, Thomas Garrett, the man who had started the bet back at the trading post. Now she grabbed her rifle from its place by the door and positioned herself where she could see outside through the window. 3 men stood in the snow outside the cabin, and Thomas Garrett was speaking loudly. "Come on out, Stone. We know you are in there. We want to check on our investment, make sure the woman is still alive. It has been 3 months. For all we know, you could be planning to cheat us." Eleanor's hands shook as she gripped the rifle. What were these men doing here in the middle of winter? The bet was not supposed to be settled until spring when the passes cleared. This made no sense unless they had ulterior motives. The barn door opened, and Elijah emerged, his own rifle held casually but ready. Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he moved as he approached the 3 men. "The bet was that she survives the winter and I bring her to the trading post come spring," Elijah said, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Nothing was said about you coming here to check on her. You need to leave. Now." "Now that's not very friendly, Stone," Thomas Garrett replied, but there was an edge to his voice. "We just want to see that she is alive and well. That was part of the deal, remember? She has to be healthy, not just barely surviving." "Eleanor is perfectly healthy," Elijah stated. "You will have proof of that when I bring her down in the spring as agreed. Until then, you are trespassing on my land, and I am asking you to leave." One of the other men, a weasel-faced individual Eleanor vaguely remembered from the trading post, spoke up. "Maybe we want to renegotiate the terms of the bet. Maybe we think $100 is not enough for a pretty woman like that. Maybe we want her back, Stone. You cannot keep her to yourself forever." The threat was clear, and Eleanor saw Elijah's entire body go rigid. "The lady is under my protection, and she stays here of her own free will," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You will not touch her, you will not come near her, and if you do not leave my property right now, I will give you a reason to regret coming here." "Big words for one man facing 3, Thomas Garrett sneered, and Eleanor saw him reach for the gun at his hip. Everything happened in a blur. Elijah's rifle came up in one smooth motion, and the crack of the shot echoed through the mountains. Snow exploded at Thomas Garrett's feet, and the man jumped back with a curse. "The next shot will not miss," Elijah said coldly. "Leave now or test me, your choice." Eleanor threw open the cabin door, her own rifle raised and pointed at the 3 men. "You heard him," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Leave our property and do not come back. I am alive and healthy as you can plainly see, and I am here because I choose to be. The bet stands as originally made. Now get out of here before I decide to help Elijah convince you." The 3 men stared at her, clearly not expecting her to emerge armed and defiant. Thomas Garrett's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize a losing situation when he saw one. "This is not over, Stone," he spat. "We will see you come spring, and that woman better be alive and well, or you will owe us more than money." "Get out," Elijah ordered. Ure and the 3 men retreated, moving back toward the trail that led down the mountain. Elijah and Eleanor stood side by side, weapons ready, watching until the men disappeared into the tree line. Only then did Eleanor begin to shake. Elijah immediately took her rifle and set both weapons aside, then pulled her into his arms. "You did well," he murmured into her hair. "You were brave and strong. and I'm proud of you." I was terrified, Eleanor admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "What if they come back? What if they bring more men?" "Then we will deal with it," Elijah said firmly. "But I do not think they will. They are bullies and cowards who thought they could intimidate us. They learned otherwise. Word will spread that we stood up to them. And that will discourage others from trying the same thing." "Why did they really come here?" Eleanor asked, pulling back to look up at him. "It was not just to check on me, was it?" Elijah's expression was grim. "No. Thomas Garrett has a reputation for being a poor loser and for wanting what he cannot have. I suspect he thought he could come here and find you dead or dying, which would mean he would not have to pay the bet. Or perhaps he thought he could intimidate me into giving you up. Some men cannot stand to see another man win something they have decided should be theirs." "I am not a possession to be won or traded," Eleanor said, anger flaring through her fear. "No, you are not," Elijah agreed. "You are a strong, intelligent, capable woman who makes her own choices, and you chose to stand beside me just now, armed and ready to fight. That means everything to me, Eleanor. It means we are truly partners in this life we are building." Eleanor reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the passion and love and relief she felt. "I will always stand beside you, Elijah Stone," she whispered against his lips. "In good times and bad, in safety and danger. You saved my life, and I will spend the rest of mine showing you what that means to me." They returned to the cabin and secured it for the night, barring the door and keeping weapons close at hand. But the men did not return, and as the days passed, the tension slowly eased. Elijah remained vigilant, always checking the perimeter of their property for signs of intruders, but it seemed Thomas Garrett and his companions had indeed given up. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt during the day, though it still froze solid at night. Elijah began preparing for the trip down to the trading post, knowing they would need to settle the bet and make their presence known to establish that Eleanor had indeed survived the winter. But more importantly, they needed to find a preacher to marry them officially. "I want to do this right," Elijah told Eleanor one evening as they sat by the fire. "I want you to have a proper wedding, even if it is small and simple. You deserve that." "All I need is you," Eleanor replied, taking his hand in hers. "The words spoken, the promises made, those are what matter. Everything else is just decoration." But Elijah was determined, and Eleanor loved him all the more for wanting to give her a traditional wedding. As the snow continued to recede and the first signs of spring appeared, they prepared for the journey. Eleanor felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had not seen another soul besides Elijah since they had climbed into these mountains 4 months ago, and the thought of facing Thomas Garrett and his companions again made her uneasy. "You will not be alone," Elijah reminded her. "I will be right there beside you, and everyone will see that you not only survived but thrived. You have gained weight, your color is good, and you look healthy and strong. They will have no choice but to admit they were wrong and pay the bet." In mid-March, when Elijah judged the trail safe enough for passage, they loaded supplies onto the pack horse and began the descent. The journey that had taken hours in the brutal winter cold now took a full day of careful navigation through snowmelt and muddy terrain. They camped one night on the trail, and Elijah built a shelter and fire while Eleanor prepared their meal. They slept wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, and Eleanor thought she had never been happier. They arrived at the trading post on a bright afternoon, and Eleanor was struck by how different it looked in the spring light compared to the dark, desperate place she remembered from November. They tied the horses outside, and Elijah took Eleanor's hand firmly in his before they entered. The trading post was busy with trappers and traders who had also emerged from winter isolation, and conversation stopped when Elijah and Eleanor walked through the door. Vernon Pike stood behind his bar, and his eyes widened when he saw them. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Stone actually did it." Thomas Garrett was there, along with 2 of the men who had accompanied him to the cabin. His face darkened when he saw Eleanor, but he could not deny the evidence before his eyes. She looked healthy, her color good, her eyes bright. She wore a new dress that Elijah had surprised her with, made from fabric he had kept hidden away, and she looked every inch a woman well cared for and loved. "Gentlemen," Elijah said, his voice carrying through the now silent room, I believe you owe me $100. Eleanor Whitmore survived the winter, as I said she would. She is healthy and strong, and she stands here of her own free will. The bet is won." Thomas Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but too many witnesses surrounded them. Slowly, grudgingly, he and the other men pulled out money and counted it onto the bar. Elijah took it without gloating, simply nodded once, and then turned his attention to Vernon Pike. "We need information. Is there a preacher anywhere within reasonable traveling distance?" Vernon Pike scratched his beard thoughtfully. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through Silver Creek about 30 miles east. If you time it right, you might catch him there in the next week or so." "Thank you," Elijah replied. He turned to address the room at large. "I want everyone here to know that Eleanor and I are to be married. She is my intended wife, and she's under my protection. Anyone who bothers her or treats her with anything less than respect will answer to me. Are we clear?" There were nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Now, most of the men present had a healthy respect for Elijah Stone's reputation and no desire to cross him. Thomas Garrett left without another word, his face black with suppressed rage. But Eleanor did not care. She had won. They had won. They purchased supplies and then headed for Silver Creek, determined to find the preacher and marry as soon as possible. The town was larger than the trading post, with an actual main street and several buildings including a church. They learned that the circuit preacher was indeed expected within the next few days, and they took a room at the small boarding house to wait. Those days were magical for Eleanor. They explored the town together, Elijah showing a side of himself she had not seen before, more relaxed and open in this space away from the isolation of the mountains. He bought her a simple gold wedding band from the general store, and Eleanor bought fabric to make a proper wedding dress, though it would be simple and practical. The preacher arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened to their story and agreed to marry them the following day. "I can see the love between you," he said with a warm smile. "It shines in your eyes when you look at each other. It would be my honor to join you in marriage." Eleanor spent that evening sewing her dress, a simple but elegant gown of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Elijah disappeared for several hours and returned with a mysterious package that he refused to let her see, saying it was a surprise for the wedding. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, the spring sun warming the earth and bringing everything back to life. Eleanor dressed with care, her hands shaking slightly with excitement and nervousness. She wished her family could be there to see her marry, but she knew they would have approved of Elijah. He was everything a husband should be: strong, kind, protective, loving, and honorable. When Eleanor emerged from the boarding house, Elijah was waiting for her outside the church, and the sight of him took her breath away. He had trimmed his beard and pulled his long hair back neatly, and he wore a new shirt of fine linen that emphasized his broad shoulders and powerful build. But it was his expression that made tears spring to her eyes, pure love and joy and wonder, as though he could not believe his good fortune. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen." "You are quite handsome yourself," Eleanor replied, taking his offered arm. "I am the luckiest woman alive to be marrying you." The ceremony was simple but profound. They stood before the preacher in the small church with only a handful of townspeople as witnesses, but the words they spoke carried the weight of absolute sincerity. Elijah's hands were steady as he slipped the gold band onto Eleanor's finger, but she could see the emotion in his eyes as he vowed to love, honor, and protect her for all the days of his life. When it came time for Eleanor to speak her vows, her voice was clear and strong. "I, Eleanor Whitmore, take you, Elijah Stone, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, stand beside you in all circumstances, and be your partner in building the life we both dream of. From this day forward, you will never be alone, and neither will I. We are bound together, heart and soul, for as long as we both shall live." "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a warm smile, and Elijah did not need to be told twice. He cupped Eleanor's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness and passion that made the small group of witnesses sigh. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears of joy. Elijah opened his mysterious package to reveal a beautiful shawl of soft wool dyed a deep red, which he draped around Eleanor's shoulders. "I bought the wool last fall and had the woman at the boarding house dye and weave it over the winter," he explained. "I wanted you to have something special for our wedding day." Eleanor was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness, by the planning and care he had put into making this day special for her. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him again, not caring that they had an audience, wanting only to show him how much he meant to her. They celebrated with a simple meal at the boarding house, and that night they were truly husband and wife in every sense. Elijah was gentle and patient, taking his time to show Eleanor the depths of his love, and she responded with all the passion in her generous heart. They loved each other through the night, and when dawn broke, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, exhausted but blissfully happy. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, tracing patterns on Elijah's muscled chest, "for saving my life, for loving me, for giving me a future when I thought all hope was lost." "Thank you," Elijah replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "for bringing light back into my darkness, for showing me that life could be good again, for choosing to love a rough mountain man who had forgotten how to be human." "You are the most human man I have ever known," Eleanor said firmly. "You have a heart that feels deeply, a soul that cares profoundly, and a spirit that never gives up. I am proud to be your wife, Elijah Stone." They stayed in Silver Creek for another week, enjoying the novelty of being around other people and the comforts of town life. But both of them were eager to return to their mountain cabin, to the life they had built together in isolation and peace. The journey back was far easier than the original trip had been, on the trail now clear of snow and the weather mild and pleasant. When they finally reached the cabin, Eleanor felt a rush of homecoming that surprised her with its intensity. This rough log structure in the wilderness was home now, more so than any place she had ever lived before. Spring exploded across the mountains in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Elijah began work on expanding the cabin as planned, and Eleanor started her garden, planting seeds they had purchased in Silver Creek and tending them with care. They fell into the rhythm of their life together, working side by side during the day and loving each other at night. As summer approached, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. The signs were unmistakable: the nausea in the mornings, the exhaustion that overtook her unexpectedly, the changes in her body that only she noticed at first. She waited until she was certain before telling Elijah, wanting to be sure so as not to disappoint him if she was wrong. One evening in late June, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Eleanor took Elijah's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly, watching his face for his reaction. Elijah froze, his eyes wide with shock and then filling with tears. "A baby," he whispered. "Eleanor, are you certain?" "I am certain," she confirmed, her own eyes misting with happy tears. "We are going to be parents, Elijah. You are going to be a father again." Elijah gathered her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his shoulders shake with sobs. "I thought I would never have this again," he choked out. "I thought I had lost my chance at a family forever. Oh, Eleanor, you have given me everything. You have given me life and love and hope, and now a child. How can I ever thank you for such gifts?" "Love me," Eleanor said simply. "Love me and our child and any other children we might have. Build this life with me, Elijah. That is all the thanks I need." They clung to each other as the sun set and the stars emerged, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss and despair. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Elijah was almost comically protective, insisting Eleanor rest frequently and refusing to let her do anything he deemed too strenuous. Eleanor found his concern endearing, even when it became a bit excessive, and she indulged him, because she knew it came from a place of love and fear. He had lost one child already, and she understood his terror of losing another. They made the trip down to Silver Creek in early October to stock up on supplies before winter set in again and to consult with the town's doctor about Eleanor's pregnancy. The doctor assured them everything looked healthy and normal and gave them advice on what to expect when the baby came in early March. Will you be all right up in the mountains when the time comes? The doctor asked with concern. That is a long way from help if anything goes wrong. I have delivered babies before, Elijah replied quietly. I helped bring my son into the world, and I assisted with several births back in Pennsylvania before I moved west. I know what to do, and I will take care of Eleanor and our child. The doctor looked relieved. Good. You seem like a capable man, Mr. Stone. Just make sure you have plenty of clean linens and hot water ready, and do not hesitate to come get me if there are any complications you cannot handle. They returned to the cabin with their supplies and settled in for their second winter together, this one vastly different from the first. Where that first winter had been about survival and gradually falling in love, this winter was about preparation and anticipation. Elijah finished the second room he'd been building, turning it into a proper bedroom for them and freeing up the main room to serve as living space and eventually a nursery area. Eleanor spent the winter months sewing baby clothes and blankets, preparing everything they would need for their new arrival. Elijah carved a beautiful cradle from wood he had been carefully drying, inlaying it with delicate designs that showed his love and care. They talked endlessly about names and their hopes for their child, and they dreamed of the family they would build together. Christmas that year was even more special than the previous one, colored by the joy of Eleanor's growing belly and the baby who kicked and moved inside her. They exchanged simple gifts. Eleanor had knitted Elijah a warm scarf, and he had carved her a set of beautiful hair combs from dark wood. But the greatest gift was simply being together, warm and safe and in love, awaiting the arrival of their child. January and February passed slowly, Eleanor growing larger and more uncomfortable as her time approached. Elijah became even more attentive and protective, constantly checking on her and making sure she had everything she needed. He read to her from their precious few books, massaged her aching back and swollen feet, and held her close at night when the baby's movements kept her from sleeping comfortably. In early March, as the first hints of spring began to appear again, Eleanor's labor began. It started in the early morning hours with mild cramping that gradually intensified throughout the day. Elijah remained calm and steady, having prepared thoroughly for this moment. He helped Eleanor through each contraction, breathing with her and encouraging her, and when the time came to push, he was right there, supporting her and guiding her through the process. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. But Elijah never left her side. He wiped the sweat from her brow, gave her water to drink, held her when the pain became almost unbearable, and told her repeatedly how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. Finally, in the early hours of March morning, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Elijah's hands shook as he caught the baby and cleaned him, checking to make sure he was healthy and whole. When he was satisfied, he wrapped the infant in a soft blanket and placed him in Eleanor's arms. "He is perfect," Eleanor breathed, tears streaming down her exhausted face as she looked at her son. "Look at him, Elijah. He is absolutely perfect." Elijah knelt beside the bed, his own face wet with tears, and stroked one finger down his son's soft cheek. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. You are both the most precious things in my life. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for him, for this, for everything." They named him Isaac Whitmore Stone, and he became the center of their world. Elijah proved to be an attentive and loving father, constantly holding his son and talking to him, showing him the world outside the cabin windows and explaining everything with a patience that made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. She watched her husband with their child and marveled at the gentleness in those large, strong hands, the softness in those gray-blue eyes, the tenderness in that deep voice. Spring brought renewed life to the mountains and to their family. Isaac thrived, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Eleanor recovered quickly from the birth, and soon they had settled into a new routine that accommodated their expanding family. Elijah taught Eleanor more about living in the wilderness, and she taught him more about the domestic arts she had learned from her mother. Together, they were building something lasting and beautiful. When Isaac was 2 months old, they made the trip down to Silver Creek again, wanting to show off their son and also to have him baptized. The townspeople were delighted to see the small family, and many commented on how happy and healthy all three of them looked. The preacher who had married them performed the baptism, and the same small community who had witnessed their wedding now witnessed the blessing of their child. Thomas Garrett was there, and he approached them outside the church after the ceremony. Eleanor tensed. But Elijah simply placed a protective hand on her back and waited to see what the man wanted. To their surprise, Thomas looked uncomfortable and perhaps even ashamed. "I owe you an apology," Thomas said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Both of you. I was wrong about you, Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Stone, I mean. You proved yourself stronger than I ever gave you credit for. And Stone, you are a better man than I am. You took her in and gave her a chance when the rest of us were ready to write her off. I am sorry for the trouble I caused, and I hope you can accept my apology." Eleanor looked at Elijah, who studied Thomas for a long moment before nodding once. "Apology accepted," Elijah said. "We have more important things to focus on than past grudges." Thomas nodded his thanks and walked away, and Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief. "I am glad that is settled," she said. "So am I," Elijah agreed, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Now let us go home. Our son needs his rest, and so do we." They returned to their mountain sanctuary and settled back into their life of peaceful isolation. The years that followed were good ones, filled with the simple pleasures of family and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Isaac grew into a strong, healthy boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did, and Elijah taught him everything he knew about surviving and thriving in the wilderness. 2 years after Isaac's birth, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Mary, after Elijah's first wife and Eleanor's mother. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray-blue eyes, and she was as fierce and independent as her older brother. Elijah doted on his daughter, and Eleanor loved watching the big, strong mountain man reduced to putty in the hands of his little girl. 3 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas Daniel, and their family felt complete. The cabin had been expanded twice more by then, growing to accommodate their growing family, and Elijah had built a proper barn and even a small schoolhouse where Eleanor could teach the children their letters and numbers. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and lean times, illnesses and injuries, and all the challenges that came with living so far from civilization. But through it all, Elijah and Eleanor faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. They had built something rare and precious, a true partnership based on mutual respect, deep affection, and unwavering commitment. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Elijah took Eleanor back to the spot where he had first brought her to the cabin, where they had begun their journey together. The children were safe with a neighboring family who had moved into the area a few years earlier, giving them a rare night alone together. "Do you remember that first night?" Elijah asked as they stood looking at the cabin in the golden light of sunset. "When I brought you here, and you were so frightened and exhausted, but you still had that steel in your spine that told me you would fight to survive?" "I remember everything," Eleanor replied, leaning against his solid warmth. "I remember thinking you were the most intimidating man I had ever seen, and also the most kind. I remember falling asleep that night feeling safe for the first time since my family died. I remember watching you and slowly realizing I was falling in love with you. Those fools at the trading post bet that you would not survive the winter," Elijah said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But I knew better. I saw the strength in you, the will to live. I took that bet knowing I would win, but I never expected to win so much more than money. I won your love, Eleanor. I won a life I had thought lost forever. I won a family and a future, and a reason to live rather than just survive." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. "You saved my life, Elijah Stone. You took a broken, desperate woman and showed her that life could still be beautiful. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but myself. You built a home with me and gave me children, and showed me every single day what it means to be truly loved. I am the one who won, my darling. I won everything that matters." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a love that would last forever. Around them, the wilderness stretched vast and beautiful, no longer threatening but welcoming, a home they had claimed together through love and determination and an unwavering faith in each other. The years continued to pass, each one adding new memories and experiences to their shared life. Isaac grew into a strong young man who eventually married a girl from Silver Creek and built his own cabin within a day's ride of his parents, while wanting to stay close to the mountains he loved. Sarah married a trader who respected her independent spirit and settled in town, where she opened a successful general store. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a mountain man in his own right and helping Elijah manage the expanding trap lines. Elijah and Eleanor grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces showing the lines earned through years of laughter and hard work and deep love. But their love never faded or diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences and tested by challenges overcome together. On a spring evening 40 years after that fateful day, when Elijah had taken the bet that changed both their lives, they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Their children and grandchildren had visited for Easter, filling the cabin with noise and laughter and joy. And now it was just the two of them again, comfortable in the companionable silence that came from decades of partnership. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked, taking Elijah's weathered hand in hers. "Not a single one," Elijah replied, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Stone. Loving you and being loved by you has been the greatest privilege of my life." "They bet I would not survive the winter," Eleanor said with a soft laugh. "But I did more than survive. I lived, truly lived, every single day of these 40 years. I loved and was loved. I raised children and built a home. I found joy and purpose and meaning. All because a mountain man with a kind heart took a chance on a desperate woman and showed her what love really means." "We saved each other," Elijah said, pulling her close against his side. "I was just surviving before you came into my life. You showed me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope for the future. We built this life together, Eleanor, and it has been more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, two hearts beating as one, bound together by a love that had conquered despair and built something eternal from the ashes of loss. The mountains stood silent witness to their enduring devotion, and the wind whispered through the pines like a benediction. She blessing the love story that had begun with a desperate bet and grown into something truly magnificent. In the end, Elijah had won far more than $100. He had won a life filled with love and purpose and joy. He had won a family and a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. But most importantly, he had won the heart of an extraordinary woman who had proven that strength comes in many forms and that love, real and true love, can transform everything it touches. And Eleanor, the woman they had bet would not survive the winter, had not only survived, but had thrived beyond anyone's expectations. She had found love in the most unexpected place, had built a family in the wilderness, and had lived a life rich with meaning and purpose. She'd proven that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in physical prowess, but in the courage to keep going when all seems lost, and in the wisdom to recognize and accept love when it is offered. Their story became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations as an example of what true love could accomplish. People spoke of the mountain man who had taken a bet on a dying woman's life and won not just money, but a love that lasted a lifetime. They spoke of the woman who had survived against all odds and built a legacy of strength and courage that inspired everyone who heard her tale. But for Elijah and Eleanor, it was never about legend or legacy or proving anything to anyone else. It was simply about two people who had found each other when both needed rescue, who had chosen to face life's challenges together, and who had built something beautiful from the raw materials of love, determination, and unwavering commitment. As they grew old together in their mountain sanctuary, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, they knew beyond any doubt that they had found something rare and precious. They had found true love, the kind that endures through hardship and celebrates in joy, the kind that sees beyond surface appearances to the soul beneath, the kind that chooses commitment over convenience and partnership over possession. And when their final days came, many years later, they faced them as they had faced everything else, together. Elijah passed first on a quiet winter morning, holding Eleanor's hand and whispering words of love with his last breath. Eleanor followed him within a year, on her heart unable to continue without its other half. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their cabin, in the mountains they had loved, beneath the sky they had watched together for so many years. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren mourned them, but also celebrated the remarkable love story that had given them all life. They told the tale of how grandmother Eleanor had survived that first terrible winter, how grandfather Elijah had won the bet and won her heart as well, and how their love had created a legacy that would continue for generations to come. The cabin still stands in those mountains, maintained by the family as a tribute to the love that built it. And sometimes when the wind whispers through the pines and the sun sets in brilliant colors over the peaks, people say you can still feel the presence of that love, eternal and enduring, a testament to what two people can create when they choose to face life together with open hearts and unwavering devotion. Elijah Stone had taken a bet that a fragile woman would not survive the winter. He had kept her alive through determination and skill and care. But in the process, he had won something far more valuable than money. He had won love, true and lasting love, and in doing so, he had found his way back to life itself. And Eleanor had found in him not just a rescuer, but a partner, a lover, a husband, and the father of her children, everything she had thought lost forever when disease had stolen her family. Together, they had proven that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on people when everyone else has given up hope. Their story was one of survival, yes, but more importantly, it was one of thriving, of building, of creating something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of two wounded hearts and one incredible chance at redemption. They won more than a bet that long ago winter. They won a lifetime of happiness, a legacy of love, and a story that would inspire everyone who heard it to believe in the transforming power of true love. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.